Good morning. The Ad Hoc Committee on Gang Violence and Youth Development will now come to order as a special meeting. With that, we will take the items on the agenda in the order that they appear on the agenda. We'll begin with item number 1.
Item number 1 is the Chief Legislative Analyst Report in response to Resolution Smith for Parks, Cardenas, relative to the city's position on H.R. 3846, the Youth Prison Reduction Through Opportunities, Mentoring, Intervention, Support, and Education Act, the Youth Promised Act. This item was also referred to Rules and Government Committee.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Annie Janino from the CLA's office. I'm just going to give a quick summary, if that's okay, and
Yes,
the
thank you.
status report. The Youth Promise Act provides federal funding to cities to help support local gang prevention and intervention efforts. The purpose of the act is to direct resources towards communities plagued with gang activity to address the root causes of gang violence and decrease the amount of money spent on incarceration. The act is structured as follows. First, the Justice Department's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the administrator of the program, will set up Promise advisory panels to develop standards for evaluating potential grantees. The panel will then allocate funding to selected communities on the basis of the greatest need. Second, the Youth Promise grants will be administered by local councils called Promise Coordinating Councils, PCCs, which exist of a wide range of entities, including representatives from law enforcement, schools, social services, community, and faith-based organizations. PCCs will be responsible for developing a plan aimed at redirecting youth involved in gangs toward productive and law-abiding alternatives. The Act will also establish a National Center for Proven Practices Research to collect and disseminate information to the PCCs and to the public on current research and practices related to juvenile delinquency and gang prevention and intervention. The Act will also implement youth-oriented policing services training programs where law enforcement officers will receive specialized police training in gang activity prevention and intervention. Finally, the Act will expand the federal witness relocation program to include victims of gang violence. And the current status of the Act is, according to Representative Scott's office, the bill is currently being revised to add additional provisions. It's anticipated that it will be reintroduced simultaneously in the House and the Senate in the next few weeks. And I've provided a amended resolution to include support of the Act based on the CLA's recommendation for FY 0910. And the departments are also here if you have any questions on how to affect them.
Thank you. Apparently, it had an HR number, and
Right.
that number will likely be
It's going
different.
to be changed, yeah.
So what we'll be looking at today in adopting in the resolution is the support of the Act instead of a particular bill number.
Right. I think they said they were planning on keeping it the Youth Promise Act, but yeah.
Yeah, the actual description, the name of it, the title, they will keep, but the numbers change as they submit
Right.
each legislative session. Okay, thank you. I have some questions for some of the departments, and also if you'd like to comment on any items, there are cards in the back. You can submit them up front if you'd like to make public comment on this item. So with that, the Department of Children, Youth, and Their Families.
Good morning, Council Member Rafael Lopez,
Good morning.
Executive Director.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for corresponding to the council on this
Certainly.
matter. And so can you please give us some verbal feedback as to what you see in the Promise Act and how you could envision or would see that should this pass, and as it's written, how it would affect your department and or related relationships within the city?
Certainly. So to begin, last June 19th of 2008, the commissioners of the Commission for Children, Youth, and Their Family voted to support and recommend to the council and to the mayor to include this in the federal legislative package. We think that this dovetails beautifully the work that's happening in the city of LA, both through the gang reduction youth development work, as well as the momentum that's surrounding us, both city and county-wide, as well as our local-based community organizations. We think that, first of all, this is a bit of a no-brainer in terms of actually putting more dollars in making sure that young people do not go to prison, that they actually have the kind of mentoring opportunities, teaching, and other kind of after-school-based programs that research, evidence-based not only nationally but internationally, has shown actually can do more for kids versus a suppression methodology. Thirdly, we believe that This is a great time in the context of the new Obama administration, and we would strongly urge you as a council member to work with your colleagues to actually introduce this as a stimulus package as well in terms of LA. Much of the stimulus conversation thus far is around technology, greening, environment, roads, et cetera, but we believe there's actually possibilities to make sure this is the kind of stimulus package that also infuses cash and jobs around both our community-based organization community and the various kinds of programs that certainly support as a pillar of this community the work that's important to keep kids out of prison. In terms of the fourth point that you asked related to the departments, it could potentially have a great impact not only on ours but the rest of the city family. From our read of the bill, it's very similar in structure to the bill that you authored under your leadership with the Cardenas-Schiff bill many years ago in terms of its the concept and vision regarding its councils and planning. We would argue that there's certainly lots of wiggle room, as you've been able to witness, in terms of how it should be pulled together, and there should be much broader consensus and participation from multiple interest groups who are interested in keeping kids out of prison. We think that if done well in its revisions in this new form, as the CLA mentioned, that it could provide both dollars directly to the city, the county, and community-based organizations.
Okay. And when it comes to your particular department, do you see that on a very limited dimension, it could assist in the work that your department does, or on a very broad basis, it could actually assist in expanding and or doing more work that you're already doing and expanding into work that you aren't able to do because the resources aren't there today?
I think the latter. I think the issue is resources. As any other small department in the city would talk about, the financial crisis is hard-hitting. Mm-hmm. And so we're having to make very difficult decisions and make drastic programmatic reductions for fiscal year 09-10. This kind of act could actually provide much-needed additional infusion of cash dollars from the federal level. And we would certainly want to place this as a higher priority on our federal legislative package.
Okay, so you categorize your department as a small department.
Absolutely.
And on the other end of the spectrum, maybe the police department is not considered a small department.
Not at all.
Okay, and especially when it comes to resources, or even in the signals that are being sent by some of the elected officials in the city, all departments are going to have to take cuts. One particular department, the largest, sounds like they're not going to have to take as much of a haircut as the rest of the departments. So, again, smaller departments seem to have to deal with less and do more with less. Some departments don't have that same constraint.
Indeed.
Okay. That's my opinion. I'm not asking you
No,
to throw yourself
certainly.
in front of the police bus.
No, I understand. I'll let better minds speak to that.
Police doesn't have buses. County buses, yeah. County sheriffs have buses.
The bottom line is we think it's a really good bill, and it has great potential for not only our department, but many departments like Recreation and Parks, who's a larger department but faced with the same kinds of drastic reductions. LA's Best, another one of the evidence-based phenomenal models that's out of Los Angeles, could use the resources, the work out of the Human Relations Commission. There are countless commissions and departments who could broaden this act as currently written and use that federal drawdown to do much, much more work in LA.
And one of the things I'd like to get clarity on is I've read the bill, but not in its entirety, unfortunately, and I keep trying to read it, and I can't. I'm fascinated by it, and I get stuck on it, and then I write notes, and I don't end up finishing. But the basis of funding, obviously, the way the feds work, they tend to do block grant style. But what's our interpretation of is it on a per capita, or is it on a range of a cap basis? Because one of the biggest problems, speaking of large and small, one of the biggest problems that we have being California, we're beyond 10% of the entire country's population. And then when you look at this category of issues, we're probably overly represented when it comes to need in these 14 to 24-year-olds. But what happens is you get places like on the East Coast, you get states that maybe have 1 million people, maybe a little bit more. We've got 40 million, and they get all upset because they say, why are you sending such a big check to California? Why are you sending them $500 million when our check, say in Virginia, is only $3 million? Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at it on a per capita basis, they're still doing better than us. So my question is, one of the things that we need to be diligent about at the local level, the implementation level, is we need to be mindful of the fact that they need to get away from that jealousy system that they have in Washington, where everybody gets to pick on California, and then therefore the drawdown in California on a per capita basis is dismal compared to other states.
I would respectfully then recommend to you and the council and the mayor's office that when advocating for this bill in terms of the federal legislative package, that you actually talk about, let the data speak for itself. The number of young people that are in the juvenile justice system prior to entering essentially the youth prison system is staggering. And there's very little comparison nationally. New York is probably the closest thing. But if you approach it in the context of letting the data speak for itself, what are the challenges that those youth are facing, and maybe move away from the per capita language, you may get some more constituent buy-in from other people nationally. Because ultimately, if you make the argument that you look at the population that's either slated to go to prison or already in the system, everyone can relate to that, whether you're in Alabama or you're in Los Angeles or you're in Wyoming, and people have commonality around that. When they hear per capita, I think they just think it's shoveling money to California and New York. So one respectful suggestion would be to think about it in the context of what are the different kinds of communities that are in danger of entering these systems, and how can we better spread the money that way. And in that case, Los Angeles would fare extremely well, because unfortunately we have so many young people in that position.
Exactly. And then when you look at a per capita basis, you look at 40 million people in the state of California. This isn't law enforcement protection money. This is services to a particular community, and it tends to be heavily weighted toward that particular age range. So when you take a per capita, why would you include people over the age of 50 and up? They're not necessarily going to be served directly. They get served by having a safer community when you have less delinquency, less of that activity. But this is direct dollars into particular programs and services to a particular community, and which is very heavily weighted toward age. So I agree with you on that. And the reason why I wanted to have that dialogue with you is because I understand your experience and far beyond your service here in the city of Los Angeles, and I was expecting that we would have that kind of response and dialogue. So thank you for expressing to the people who are listening how, I'm not going to say complicated, but how involved the thought process needs to be, even when it comes to, all right, what if it does pass? How do you give a fair and appropriate semblance of who can get the money, and when the money starts to get drawn down to the bottom, who ended up getting the money, and was it a fair process, and was it a process that actually going to allow it to be effective? Again, if you go on a pure per capita basis, you may have communities around the country that actually get the money and don't even use it. It's not that they don't need it at all, but the fact of the matter is maybe they don't have as much activity, so they don't even have the infrastructure for it, or the money is good, but it's not enough for them to set up an infrastructure, and maybe that infrastructure be an overkill. You know, maybe in some communities they need half a full-time equivalent to handle the issue. But here in Los Angeles, we need a lot of full-time equivalents at many levels to address this issue.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for your report, and also for your dialogue. Thank you. Pleasure. Any other departments here? Rec and Parks, libraries, Human Relations Commission.
This one? Okay.
You make me call you guys out individually? Come on up.
Saul
You're
Romo
here
for the
and-
Department of Cultural Affairs.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
We do support this, the legislation. We actually are very enthusiastic about these endeavors. As a small department, we certainly feel the pinch and the lack of resources and the competing resources within the city among the bigger departments. And it's these kind of opportunities allow us to partner with other large departments, such as the Recreation and Parks, even potentially with LAPD. But we also take some of these funds and leverage them with private foundations, as also with corporate donors. We strongly believe that in intervention programs, we provide summer programs, we provide after-school programs, and our whole basis is if you give the kids something else to do, give them some kind of other creative outlet, they will be focusing their energy and focusing their mental capacities to do something other than get involved in crime. And I'll give you one particularly anecdotal story that I like to tell, and that is I was at one of my art centers, and I saw the artwork of one of the students, and I was inquiring about it, and the parent of this student came up and really was very appreciative of the courses we have and the art classes. And her story was her son had been arrested for tagging. He was already on the streets. She was a working mother. He was a recalcitrant youth, and he certainly was on his course to being a recidivist criminal. And we got him involved in this art class, and it gave him something to do after school, and he redirected his energy into painting. Well, his paintings are now part of a traveling show as part of a United Nations Earth Day show, and it traveled across the country, and it's now going to potentially travel, globally. I'm not saying this guy's going to be the next Picasso. I'm not saying that he's going to be the next contemporary artist, but I think the focus is if you give these students and give these youth an opportunity to do something else and redirect their creative talents, because they're not all going to be involved in recreational sports, they're not all going to be involved in some other activity, that in some indirect way and direct way you do impact their ability to reduce their participation in crime. So I think that giving these kind of opportunities for our department to partner with other organizations to potentially get some other funding sources, and even allows us to think creatively outside the box as to how we direct our provide our services. These are the kind of opportunities that open those doors.
Well, I appreciate that example, and I look at it beyond anecdotal. I think it's anecdotal in the sense that we don't have enough of these programs. If we had more of these programs to serve, say, 10,000 youth a year or 100,000 young people a year, then we would probably have thousands of stories exactly like that. And the fact of the matter is, that's what intervention is. That's what prevention is. When you admit, well, maybe this kid isn't going to be the next Picasso, but at the same time, he's much less likely to get that second and third offense when it comes to committing a crime, such as expressing himself on somebody else's wall or private property, and then end up getting in trouble with the law because he's violated the law. So to me, that's a perfect example of what intervention and prevention is. And therefore, you have less need for the man and women hours of police officers interacting with that individual. I would venture to guess that the staff at your art centers or art programs, that their salaries to the city are probably, I would venture to say, about 1/3. I'm being generous. It's probably 1/3 all told when you look at the complete cost of an employee to the city of Los Angeles. You're talking about equipment, you're talking about salary, you're talking about benefits, retirement, all those kinds of things that we commit to our employees. So when you look at that, that is a much more efficient use of the tax dollar to be preventative or intervene, rather than saying, just wait till they run into a cop and then deal with them that way.
No, I certainly would agree with you that if you look at it in a scale of economics, that the cost of providing the staff in terms of art instructors and the resources toward providing these youth with the opportunity to do something else before they become a police problem at the cost of having the police dealing with them, it certainly makes more economic sense. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sir, thank you.
The other departments? Okay.
Anita Meacham, Class Parks, Department of Recreation and Parks.
And Carl Cooper, Recreation and Parks also.
Okay. Youth Promise Act?
Yeah, well, Recreation and Parks definitely will commit to supporting this. Any way we can get more funds to help with the programs we're doing, especially like Class Parks, is a huge help. We see also where we could actually expand and work more like the Summer Night Lights program we did with the mayor's office this summer. I mean, if you have the funds available to keep kids off the street and active, between 4 and midnight during the summer, that's a great program. And with more money, you can run more programs like that. Looking at partnerships with community-based organizations. Kids are at parks, but they're also in communities. So if we can partner with those community-based organizations because they have money, we have more resources, we're going to help more families. Those are just some basic things we see in recreation and parks as a help.
Mm-hmm. Is there a shortage of constituents that need these services?
We don't have enough money to help all the constituents that need the help.
So today there's actually a shortage of resources to reach all of these constituents.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Right. I mean, something as small as enhance money for youth sports keeps kids busy. And, if a parent can't pay for a youth sports league and money is there to help or research there to help, that kid will be off the street and busy anywhere between 5 to 10 hours a week because they're active. Mm-hmm. One of the things I'd like to incorporate in all of our language, including my own, is I think we've all fallen into the
the description of describing what we need to do with our youth and keeping them busy, keeping them safe, keeping them busy, keeping them away from other things. But I think we need to take it one step further, because you sell yourself short when you say, well, when they're at our parks, we're keeping them busy. No, you're not just keeping them busy, you're engaging them. You're actually getting them to exercise certain skills, be they marketing skills for actually going out to get a job later. By the way, people get paid very well when they're good artists, for example, and also people, the 0.001% that actually become professional, be it a basketball player, football player, soccer, or what have you, they get paid very well as well. So we should stop selling ourselves short by just describing our activities as keeping them busy. We really need to change that language and say that we're giving them skills, and we're actually allowing them and encouraging them and giving the environment and the resources to exercise those skills. Sometimes skills that they might not even realize they even have. Or maybe that's the skill that actually inspires them to say, now I know what I want to be when I grow up, right?
Exactly.
That young man who was caught in the story earlier, when he was caught tagging, and then now all of a sudden he is, in fact, seems talented artistically and is actually putting it in a much more positive medium. He's actually exercising his skills. Not only is he using his natural talents, he's actually learning techniques and things of that nature that may take him, who knows, maybe this kid actually goes to college on a scholarship for art.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's something that I bet you his family never even thought of. And I can guess his parents probably didn't go to college either.
Exactly.
So how do they know how to tell him, hey, son, instead of telling them go get a job, actually learn on their own and stop being ignorant like my parents were with us 11 kids, and not even realize that you can go to college and do a whole range of things and actually even make money doing it. Where most parents in poor communities say, no, get a high school diploma and then just go get a job.
Right.
Even if it's minimum wage, it's something. Instead of realizing what we're hearing on the radio, I heard recently, and the fact of the matter is, they're pushing kids to go to college, community college, and saying, look, people with a BA over their lifetime get $1 million or $2 million more in income because they go to school. You get what I'm saying? So
Definitely.
you are
Definitely.
contributing to that.
Definitely. And I know with our team programs, what we try to do is, like you said, you get a young man in there, what does he want to do? He wants to be a professional athlete. Well, we said that's great, but do you think about how many other things the sports world you can do, from something as little as working in field management, working in sales, working in the front office, and open their mind up to not just being an athlete, not just doing this, but there's a bevy of other jobs and other things that you can do. So we try to get that into their head early, when they're 11, 12, 13, 14, and this will definitely help.
And in addition to the sports programs, we believe that if we were able to expand programs such as the Adventure Program, which is a major component of Class Parks, where youth actually have an opportunity to get outside of their normal environment, their community, and go to the mountains and mountain bike, or go to the American River and whitewater raft, or hiking or camping. And those things help to transform these kids, where before they might have been fearful of so many things in life. Just the fact that they're able to overcome these fears of facing the water or snorkeling or whatever it might be, it helps to build their character, and we do see a transformation in a lot of these kids coming from Nickerson Gardens and Jordan Downs and all over the city. So if we were able to expand programs such as that, I think we could really make an impact on the lives of kids.
So you welcome the Youth Promise Act?
Yes.
Well, one of the things I encourage you to do as a department is don't just assume that us policymakers are reading the bill as it goes through its different machinations, because that's what policymakers do. They, unfortunately, they have to make compromises or pare it down or change it a bit. Keep reading it, keep looking at the different versions of it, because if it does become law, then I think it's important for you and us to continue dialoguing and realizing how we're going to accept it, how we're going to utilize it, and how we're going to maximize it. Rather than just saying, hey, thank you very much, now we're going to get to the business of figuring out how to utilize it. I think that's important for us to do so. And another reason why it's important is when you do read it, when you do contemplate those things or what have you, don't stop there and wait for them to do it. Maybe we can, because the Schiff Cardenas Act is hopefully going to be resharpened up in the state legislature, which is still ebbing at about $100 million a year,
Wow.
Of which only a small fraction of that actually comes under the purview and control of the city of Los Angeles. Hopefully those things are going to change very soon. So my point is, stay on top of these policies that have provided funding in the past, or that may be providing funding shortly, and start to dream, start to think, well, if I had to prioritize where we would put it first, or how much over here, or how many parks we're going to expand in this fashion, or what services we're going to render, start doing so, because some of the money is still coming, and if we get this infusion, the better ready we are. As it says right now, as my staff gave it to me, it's not being done on a per capita basis. In my opinion, it's a little too loosely written, and just saying that it's going to ensure that the resources and services are provided to youth in the communities with the greatest need for such resources and services. If they were to keep the politics out of that, I wouldn't mind this language. But unfortunately, when you write something legislatively too loose, then the politics comes in, then all of a sudden you realize that it's not being, the money's not getting to the right place.
Right.
So either way, there's going to be, if this passes, your department is going to have more resources to do the kinds of things that you do, and to do the kinds of things you haven't been able to do because you lack resources.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg Dimmitt for the Community Development Department.
Okay.
I think this is
CDD,
an excellent
How
bill.
do you see your department being able to utilize this as written, as it appears today?
We operate both the Human Services Delivery System as well as the Workforce Development System. The Human Services System basically provides support to families in need, as well, both youth and their parents. And our workforce system both reaches adults and youth and puts them into jobs. So this is something needed support that I think will go a long way in supporting both those activities.
So once again, there is infrastructure here in the city of Los Angeles to utilize these kinds of resources. And there is no shortage of need out there. But
That's
there is a
correct.
shortage of resources to meet that need.
That's
as
correct.
As it is today.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary Della Rose, City Human Relations Commission. And we ditto everything everybody else has said previously. We're in agreement that there's a good process here, or good potential here. I just want to throw out that one of the key pieces as an educator I hear from students all the time is they need something to keep them busy. That's good. But the other half of it, as a human relations advocate, is that they need to have the human relations lens infused in them, especially in the city of Los Angeles. Now, there's only 5 of us in the Human Relations Commission. So one of the ways that we try to help get that lens out and that information out is what we did with Carl's folks from the class parks, where we did training, gave them the tools and the information they needed so they could do exactly what you were saying before. When those youth come to their park, they're there to help fuse along those human relations lens, those ideas that maybe the youth are not receiving otherwise. Now, I'm also working in Glassell Park, where the avenues were busted this past June. And one way that this could help there is if you have a program and you have monies to allow youth to go through a program, it opens up the other, meaning the adults, maybe other older young people, to be trained by others to begin to get the tools they need to take back their community. If they're constantly worried about where my child is or what's happening in my neighborhood, in education we have this thing called downshifting of the brain. They're too nervous to think about the other things, the broader perspectives that most of us here in this room, have the opportunity to engage in. So having these programs, any kind of program that touches on the different modalities that youth and adults, for that matter, need to learn is important to have. I have to agree with you. They have to figure the right way to shift it to the right groups. Who is truly in need? Is it just because they lived in a zip code that they're in need? Is it because of actual things that are going on day to day? But from the Human Relations Commission's point of view, that human relations lens needs to be infused in everything that comes out of these, so that these youth don't just come out with, okay, I was taken care of for 40 hours this summer. They come out with an understanding more so of what they're involved in their community, not only in their neighborhood, but as the community of Los Angeles. So that's what we throw our support
So
behind it.
give me an example of what you mean, the human relations lens.
Well, it's understanding who's there with you, who's in your neighborhood. For example, in the neighborhood where the avenues were busted, 68.7% of the people who live in that neighborhood, about 6,500 people, have less than a high school education. So how are they expected to be able to do the things that, let's say, in a neighborhood where on West Side, either West Side, you have a high education level? Okay, how are they supposed to combat and deal and go up against folks like that? So these are the kind of things that we need to recognize.
Your human relations, you use the word combat. You better.
Yeah, in a very,
that may sound a little violent.
Well, in a very esoteric way. But it is that issue. How do we go up and let people know what it is that we need? So they need to know who's there in their neighborhood. Oftentimes, there's an old saying that I used to use a lot in my classrooms. Class awareness is knowing what side of the fence you're on, but class analysis is recognizing who's there with you. And that's what the human relations lens can do. It can show you who's in the same side of the fence with you and with whom you should be working.
So, human relations is out there in the communities, and you deal with hotspot issues. You also, if you had the resources, you would probably be dealing with more of a proactive activity that you just described, and being able to reach a broader number of organizations and individuals and having more sessions, et cetera, to increase this awareness. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're directly an intervention or prevention organization. It sounds to me that you're more of a support network for individuals in the community, for organizations who are trying to do good work, and then elevating the level of awareness of the depth in which people can actually learn what you just described.
Well, I like to think of ourselves as partly as a resource center. It's our job to know all that information, who's getting educated, who's living in the neighborhood. It's our job to know who's out there doing the work. And then it's our job to try to help make those connections to folks. There's only 5 of us, so we cannot possibly be at every school or every park doing a training. But if we can train the recreation center folks to do that, if we can get folks who can come in to do the training for LAPD or whomever else, that's the way that we can help that process. With a limited budget, of course.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Any other departments here that can or would be affected by this in a positive way, of course? Don't be shy. Okay. Well, please come forward.
Good morning. Martin Flores with CDD, actually the Youth Opportunity Movement. And the reason why we came up is, this is Daniel Laughlin. We run our youth program out at one of the camps, Camp Gonzalez. We have one of our young men with us, in which this legislation, HR 3846, I think describes exactly the work that we're doing now, in which we're identifying young people prior to their release that come from throughout the city of LA and its surrounding communities, and engaging them in employment, training, education. And we've had great success. I think we're under CDD, and I think sometimes the fact that we're just a program within CDD, it's overlooked. But we are in full support. I think this is great. This is a great opportunity for agencies throughout the city to benefit from this, and from young people to have an opportunity to get re-engaged in the community.
So categorically, you're describing re-entry services.
Absolutely. Okay. And transitional services as well.
I mean, I think that's one of the most important things, getting a chance to connect prior to release with the family, with probation, and then as they transition back into the community, if you want to say providing that case management, because that's really when the challenges come up, when they go back into the communities, which are very challenging. Getting them into post-secondary education. We're in collaboration with LA Trade Tech, so many of the kids coming from the areas we serve are coming from those hot pockets. Getting them enrolled, getting them into vocational programs that lead to jobs, getting them their GED, their diplomas. This is exactly, I think, what the mayor has in mind, and we've been doing this for 3 years. And we've had great success. Right now, we would like to satellite into different camps. We're looking at fire camps where the kids are there for a longer period of time, where they could get that skill under their belt. Trade Tech's playing a part right now, meeting with a consultant, with Mr. Taylor from probation. So we're hoping that we can continue to do this work and provide these services to these youth that badly need it.
In addition to that, I think it's always been a goal to see even if HR 3846 doesn't pass, I think this model should be something that the city should look at within its own resources to develop, because in reality, if you look at our city in terms of what's allocated towards this population for these type of services, it's minimal to none. And the services that we run is actually fully funded through probation, not through the city. And so on one end, I think this could be looked upon as something our council or elected officials could look at and look at developing our own act that could better serve our population. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Anyone else from city departments here to speak? I'll be calling up the people who filled out the cards in a second. Okay. One thing that I want to remind everybody about is if you work for the city of Los Angeles and you work for a department and you're providing providing a service to the community of the city of Los Angeles, when it comes to policy making, the policy making by and large for the city of Los Angeles and the funding goes through the council of the city of Los Angeles. The administrative branch of the elected body in the city of Los Angeles is not a body, it's an individual. That's the mayor. So to the departments, you have a lot of responsibility to the mayor and the mayor's staff and to their team. But you also have a responsibility to be ready, willing, and able to report to the City Council of Los Angeles when we're discussing policy matters. So what I'm saying is, if I or any member of the City Council has a committee meeting such as this, and we have a policy matter that affects your program and or your department, and you are notified in any semblance that we may need your feedback or input when it comes to how we're going to handle that policy matter, you in your program and or your department need to come to one of these meetings and be ready to give your input. Do you understand that? That's irrespective of whatever else is pulling on you, be it the mayor's office, be it the CAO, be it anyone else. Whoever else is pulling on you of your time and your resources and your input, that is separate and apart. And if you feel that because you've already briefed the mayor's office or you've already talked to the CAO or what have you and allowed them to speak for you, you better hope, at least when it comes to coming before me, that if you think that's good enough for this committee and the policies that we're handling in this committee, that's not good enough. I'm just going to let you know right now. It's not good enough. It's duplicative. Now say it again here. Because it's my understanding through my staff that some departments that are affected, could or would be affected by this, had let my staff know that they would be here, but they wouldn't necessarily be here for input. That's not good enough. This is a policy-making committee. And I refuse to micromanage departments or programs. That is not the City Council's job, at least by my interpretation. But it is our job to understand what it is you're doing, understand what the needs are out there in the community, and then help and assist in implementing the policy rolling forward. So I'm putting everybody on notice, whether you're in this room or you're listening on the Squawk Box, I'm putting you on notice. When it comes to issues that face Council Member Tony Cardenas and the committees that I chair, it is unacceptable for anybody to say that they understand this is something that's important to them, their program, or their department, but they're not willing to speak. It is unacceptable. Your input is vital. Your input is important. And without it, we're not going to be able to provide the policy changes the way they should be done to the degree and effectiveness that they need to be. I have some public comment cards here. I'll call them up in the order that they were received. Elizabeth Calvin and Suzanne Savage and Crudy Preck.
2 minutes?
What's that?
2 minutes?
Yes, 2 minutes each. Yes. Your name again?
Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Calvin, and I'm a children's rights advocate for Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch is an independent non-governmental organization that defends human rights around the world and also here in the United States and in California. I'm here to register our support for the Parks Cardenas resolution. We support the Youth Promise Act because it is consistent with U.S. treaty obligations. It comports with science and research, and it makes sense. I don't think I need to tell this committee or you, sir, that when it comes to crime, gangs, and communities that are impacted by crime, this country is in crisis. Perhaps one of the most obvious parts of that crisis is the incarceration crisis. Last year, the Pew Committee on the Pew Center on the States found that more than 1 in 100 Americans are residing in prisons or jails. We have the highest rate of incarceration in the world, and I think that Californians are keenly aware of the results of a policy that is lock them up. Of our state's 33 prisons, almost every single one is at double capacity. More than 170,000 of our residents live in prisons. Dollars that could go for schools, jobs, and intervention are relegated to maintaining the prison system. But these failed policies of over-incarceration are particularly devastating. They are a crisis for youth. A growing body of research shows that incarceration of youth does not reduce criminal behavior. In fact, there is evidence that it increases criminal behavior. There's evidence that it does more harm than it does good. When the response to youth involved in or at risk of being involved in crimes and gangs is suppression rather than opportunity, thank you. When it's incarceration rather than intervention, what's lost is the potential of these young people. I've had the opportunity to observe in close proximity one young Angelino who became involved with gangs when he was 13 years old. I got to see what gang interventions were like in his life. This is a young man who is very smart. He's charismatic. He has great potential for leadership. The response to his gang involvement was humiliation, it was intimidation, and it was incarceration. He just turned 21 last month, and he is sitting in the county jail, and he's facing very serious charges. I have no doubt that if he had received support and intervention, he would be on a track to college, not to prison. We support the Youth Promise Act because it is a response to this crisis. As Paul Romer said a few months ago, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. We're at a unique opportunity, a place where we can reject these failed policies. The Youth Promise Act does just that. It couples evidence-based programs with the wisdom and knowledge of communities. It brings together these councils, lets the councils evaluate what are our needs, what are our strengths. Here's a plan. That plan has to comport with evidence-based programs, but it's the right way to go about this. It's a way that's looking at the potential of our youth, the strengths of our youth, and playing to that and the kind of thing that you just mentioned, not keeping them busy, but giving them skills, whether they're skills to interact with people or job skills or self-worth. All of this is consistent with our treaty obligations under international law. The Covenant on Civil and Political Rights requires states, countries, to treat youth differently, to recognize that they have a unique potential to respond to intervention. So we support your effort to have a resolution to endorse the Youth Promise Act, and we will be urging the council to pass it unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Suzanne Savage?
Good morning. I'm Suzanne Savage from the ACLU of Southern California. I'm the field director. And we're here to also support the resolution, not just our Southern California affiliate, but our Washington Legislative Office and affiliates around the country. I've brought with me a report that our Pennsylvania affiliate wanted you to see. It's about a prevention program, and also it's about the return on investment and the real numbers that are involved in prevention and intervention. And one of the standout sentences from that report is that if you stop a career criminal through prevention, you can save society $2 million. And I think that in
That's
this time of
figure.
that's a conservative figure, and I think that in this time of budget crisis, where we're seeing the governor possibly shave 5 days off a school year for a child, that these sorts of programs are really
Save
going
more
to.
money by shaving 5 days off of a year of people incarcerated.
Yes, I believe that you're right on that.
The daily rate to educate a child is probably 1/10 what it costs to keep somebody incarcerated.
Exactly. And, as the ACLU is very concerned about the whole cradle to prison pipeline rather than the cradle to college pipeline, we just are really concerned that, that this Youth Promise Act be the bill that the Congress looks at rather than a more punitive bill that the Congressman Schiff and Feinstein are proposing. And we really hope that this one prevails. It has much more, beneficial impact for society and for the children we're talking about than more punitive measures. So we really hope that you'll support this one and take a dimmer view of the Schiff-Feinstein bill.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for coming forward, and thank you for the report. And also, let me state I have a lot of respect and appreciation for then State Senator Schiff, who was my colleague in the Schiff-Cardenas Act. Yet at the same time, I wrote the juvenile justice portion of the Schiff-Cardenas Act. His portion of that bill was the cops portion. So when it comes to the work that was put into the Schiff-Cardenas Act, and he wouldn't dispute this, and I don't want to take any credit for, nor would I take any credit for the language that was written in the COPS portion of the Schiff-Cardenas Act, which was half of the funding, and the other half was the juvenile justice portion, which is the part that I wrote. It's unfortunate that people are assuming that Adam Schiff is the one who actually wrote juvenile justice legislation while in the state legislature in California. He didn't. I'm not saying he's taking credit for it, but a lot of people are making that assumption. So when they see, especially Californians, see Feinstein Schiff, they're assuming that it is in the same vein that the Schiff-Cardenas Act was in the state of California. But when you read them, they're completely different. Right. They're much more suppression-oriented in the Feinstein bill, and I appreciate you bringing up the Feinstein, I call it the Feinstein bill, the Feinstein bill, because Congressman Bob Scott, I think he's much more appropriately on the right track with what legislation needs to come out of Washington on this issue rather than U.S. Senator Feinstein. And I have personally let Feinstein's office know, she didn't come to the phone, but I let her office know that they were on the wrong track, and I offered my services and help in trying to help them write a much, much better bill. Unfortunately, there's already a congressman who's pretty much written it the way it's supposed to be written already. But hopefully, the politics that happen in Washington will be that the congressman, not the U.S. senator, prevail on this matter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Kruti Parek. Perfect. What's that?
Perfectly said.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kruti Parek, and I'm with the Youth Justice Coalition. It's a pleasure to be here with supporters and advocates. We, of course, are in full support of the Promise Act and have been. I think LA leads, as we know, unfortunately, right? LA leads the country in incarceration. I think that this is an incredible first step to lead it in a different way. Just the essence of it being titled the Youth Prison Reduction through Opportunities, Mentoring, Intervention, Support, and Education, I think is key, because it's coupling the things that people sometimes don't realize one impacts the other. If we're number one, if California is number one in incarceration and number 47, some people will argue 43, but anything besides number one in school spending is an issue. On a time of economic constraints, on a time of when my colleague at Yo Watts and I are having conversations about how can our partnership be better, but We're both really, really suffering from budget constraints. What are we doing if we are spending 10 times the amount when the benefits could be in education, in mentoring, and youth opportunities? So we just wanted to say we are in full support any way that we can help as we've worked together in the past. Please call on us, call on the young people that experience this. In a recent conversation with one of our students, he really broke down how it's impacting young people. Number one is surveillance. The more cops that are on the street, if they're not trained, if they're not culturally competent, they're going to continue to harass young people. That's not helping. Number two, families are being destroyed by incarceration, whether it's a father, a mother, a big brother, a big sister, a son, or a daughter. If families are torn apart, we're not helping communities. We're not helping safety. We know we started a school last year. We know how many young people recruit their friends to come to our school because it's youth opportunity. It's seeing their dreams unravel by learning math, by learning science, by learning English. Very basic skills that have never been learned before, they're actually learning at our school. And so reduce the surveillance, increase the mentoring, increase the opportunities, increase the dollars that flow through community-based organizations that partner with the city to make this a reality. And I think that the LA can really lead the nation in that. And we really just thank you for your support in having this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is anybody else here to speak on item number 1? We are on item number 1 in this committee, and public comment is now open on item number 1. Seeing no one come forward, item 1, public comment is now closed. With that, the action of this committee will be to approve the substitute resolution to reflect the new legislative session and to account for a more general bill description that will allow for city support upon reintroduction of the Youth Promise Act. And also, this committee will instruct the following departments: Commission on Children, Youth, and Their Families, Department of Recreation and Parks, Community Development Department, Human Relations Commission, Los Angeles Police Department, Commission on the Status of Women, Los Angeles World Airports, Department of Cultural Affairs, Port of Los Angeles, Department of Water and Power, to report back in 2 weeks relative to what impact the Youth Promise Act will have on the expansion of current or future programming as the bill is written today. Okay? Now we move on to item number 2.
Item number 2 is the City Administrative Officer Report and communication from the Mayor relative to community, law enforcement, and recovery, clear program staffing. This item was also referred to Public Safety and Personnel Committees.
Good morning.
Good morning. Arif Ali Khan, Deputy Mayor of Homeland Security and Public Safety, the City of LA.
Good morning.
Melissa Fleming.
Melissa Fleming with the CAO.
Happy New Year as well.
Happy New Year to you as well. Did you want to?
Okay.
Just briefly, the Mayor's Office of Homeland Security and Public Safety is requesting actions related to the Community Law Enforcement and Recovery, or CLEAR, program sites. As 5 new CLEAR sites are scheduled to open in the latter part of this fiscal year, the Mayor's Office is requesting resolution authority for personnel from the City Attorney's Office and the LAPD who will staff these new sites. The City Attorney personnel will be funded by existing funds devoted to the City's gang reduction program, and the LAPD personnel will be funded by the Supplemental Law Enforcement Services Fund.
Good morning again, Councilman Cardenas. Thank you for hearing this issue. As the CAO has indicated, we're simply asking for the position authorities for funding that was already provided by the Council of approximately $2.1 million to expand the current CLEAR program to what is ultimately 12 sites. It says 13 because one of them is a double site in the Rampart Division. As you know, the CLEAR program is the suppression component of the Mayor's comprehensive gang reduction strategy for each of the gang reduction and youth development zones. The funding has been identified, the positions have been identified, and we intend to roll out these additional sites within the next 6 months before the end of the fiscal year. And if I just may just indicate about the success of the CLEAR program, I'm not sure if you have received the close to year-end statistics, but the CLEAR program, as it has been for the last several years, has been the most successful gang reduction suppression component in the city. As of December 27th of last year, gang-related violent crime, which are homicides, rapes, robberies, and aggravated assaults, are down 13.6% in both the primary and secondary areas for the 8 operational sites, 8.5% for all gang crime, 5.7% for all Part 1 crimes, which is the FBI's tracking statistics, and 6.3% in Part 1 violent crime. the primary sites, as each clear site is actually divided between a primary site and a secondary site. The primary sites where the primary enforcement occurs, gang-related violent crime is down over 15%, which is truly astounding given the upward trend in various crimes that we're seeing throughout the country. By contrast, citywide, violent crime was down 4% for Part 1, 3% for Part 1 overall crime, and gang-related violent crime was down 10.6%. Now, some of that 10.6% is actually driven by the reduction in the clear sites, but as you know, the clear sites are selected purely on gang-related violent crime statistics. They're not based on any political, geographic, or other considerations, but purely on the statistics as determined by the multi-jurisdictional clear executive board.
Okay, thank you. Also, I think it's appropriate and I actually welcome when you're talking about clear sites, et cetera, that you tie outcomes of success to crime statistics when it comes to suppression programs. And I appreciate you when you said clear, et cetera, suppression oriented, which is 90-some% suppression. I appreciate your acknowledgement of that because for a long time, too many people thought that clear was suppression, intervention, prevention. It's not. We all recognize that the complementary aspects of all of those should be engaged in those communities. But at the same time, it's important for us to understand that as a society, unfortunately, we've gotten pretty darn good of following crime statistics and crime activity, et cetera, and quantifying it. Qualifying anything is a lot harder, but quantifying that. Now what the city is doing is trying to figure out ways in which we can honestly quantify and also qualify success when it comes to intervention and prevention, even when it might be that the engagement of activity is heavy suppression like clear sites and hopefully heavy intervention and prevention as well. So the point I'm making is, how do you feel about the fact that sooner rather than later, we're going to see reports talking about, or excuse me, reports and or dialogue on these matters talking about how the integration of intervention, prevention, and suppression is working in these areas?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think oftentimes people have a misperception that the CLEAR program is the prevention intervention program, and the basic theory of.
But it doesn't. Just so I want to make clear, it doesn't exclude the ability to have complementary infusion of resources and programs of intervention and prevention within the CLEAR site.
Certainly not. In fact, the model that we are using is based on the academic model of Irving Spergel, the University of Chicago professor, which has been shown to be effective, and it was based on the pilot program we did in Boyle Heights, which is you have the suppression component that focuses on the worst offenders, basically what Chief Bratton would call the 10%ers, the 10% of the violent gang members who are causing almost 70 to 80% of the crime. Mm-hmm. But by doing so, we still have an integrated approach that takes the suppression component, the police officers, the prosecutors, the probation officers, and connect them to the service providers for prevention, intervention, reentry. For example, if the police, and once the gang reduction youth development zones are fully operational with the social services side, if the police officers come into contact with an at-risk youth, that police officer has discretion.
With the other 90%.
The other 90%. Not the hardcore violent gang members who either have committed a crime or carrying weapons, et cetera. But that officer has the discretion to determine, does this person need to enter the juvenile justice system, or would he or she be better served by services? And in Hollenbeck Division in the Boyle Heights area, they actually have a ticket book that they instead of giving them a citation for a violation of state law, they give them a citation basically saying you need to go to this particular social service that they are aware of and that they work with, and have a multidisciplinary board actually manage that individual, to avoid them to go into the criminal justice system. But the vast majority of the work that these police officers, probation officers, and prosecutors do is go after the proverbial bad guys. And so that is the emphasis. And that's really the only kind of misconception. These officers are going into the areas that are in most need of not only services but also enforcement because of the incredibly high rates of violent crime. And as we've said before, the mayor and the city, I think, and I certainly recognize that suppression is not the solution. We're not going to wrest our way out of this problem. But suppression is a component of a comprehensive program. Because if you do not, in the short term, which we know suppression has a short-term effect, that's been proven and agreed to by all academics. But if you don't stabilize the situation in the short term, it is difficult for the prevention, the intervention, the reentry programs to take root and help for the long term. A kid who can't get to the park because it's too unsafe to get to that prevention program doesn't help anybody. But stabilizing the situation, making it safer so those kids can get to the park or to the arts center or to the training program, that's where we're going to see long-term results.
Thank you. You mentioned in your dialogue national trends. I thought crime was going down either slightly or, thank God, better than slightly across the country recently.
We've seen spikes in certain areas. Philadelphia, for example, has had a tremendous rise in homicides. New York has seen a downward trend slightly in homicides. We saw a pretty significant reduction. I haven't seen the latest. The FBI has not released its year-end statistics yet, but the indication, at least with violent crime, is there has been spikes in certain urban areas, of which that's what we compare ourselves to.
But overall, there seems to be a trend of a reduction in violent crime across the country.
I don't
in gross
slightly.
volume.
There may be slightly, but if you look at the urban areas that we compare ourselves to, we've seen both happen. New York has seen a downward trend. Other major urban areas have seen an upward trend. And we certainly know, given the economic situation.
I was just going to say, I can imagine if the auto industry has a catastrophic downturn, you would think that in Michigan you're going to see a lot more crime. Not that one is directly related to the other, but if you have that kind of flip of economic stability at such a dramatic shift and quickly, that you're going to see a spike in crime, more than just a spike, an ugly trend.
And one way to look at it is, we don't know exactly. There's no one factor that influences crime. We know cops matter. We know that the economy, demographics, a variety of factors. But the way I look at it is because the economy is a major factor, it actually adds pressure to increase crime because you have more people out of work, more people who, unfortunately, in those circumstances may abuse substances, which also ends in the spiral, which is the cause of a lot of property crime, which then escalate into violent crime when we go into this spiral. And that's why it's so important that we recognize that and know that we need to do the things we are to at least minimize that upward pressure to increase crime. And the first signs of that are typically property crime. Because property crime is usually the first type of crime you see in those economic trends. And, property crime even citywide went down, but not as significantly as violent crime. So that may be an indication, I'm simply speculating at this point, but that may be an indication of that sort of upward pressure because of the economy.
But it's interesting, that, and I agree with you, that right now we have to be honest with ourselves that we can speculate and try to interpret these trends or these numbers. But what I expect is that, at least within the city of Los Angeles, next year and the year after, we can actually be honest about being less speculative of the interpretation and being more, being able to really state that we think that there is a much more direct correlation than maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago, because we are looking at it differently. We are analyzing more in depth. We are being more honest with ourselves, looking at and trying to understand what are the factors that do or don't contribute to these numbers.
That's true. I mean, we learned from past experience, and I think the city has adopted a different paradigm in understanding that it's not just enforcement, that it is a comprehensive approach, but also recognizing the reality of the enforcement and the good work that the LAPD and all these other agencies do does have an effect that helps make those other programs even more effective.
Or at least allows a better environment for them to have better access to those constituents and a much more honest environment for them to engage with them.
Absolutely.
Now, I have a question about the request on this motion, on this item when it comes to the $110,000 for contractual services. But as you mentioned in your statement, you already have $2.1 million. Can you walk me through why you need that $110,000?
Are you referring to the management and administration costs of $110,000?
Mm-hmm.
Or
yes.
Okay. In any type of grant, I'll just explain to you on the grant side. My office, the Office of Homeland Security and Public Safety, administers all the Homeland Security and Public Safety grants. And so I have a team of grant specialists, analysts, and accountants who manage those grants. They do the contracts, they do the expenditures, they do the processing with the Controller's Office, et cetera. And it's a very paperwork intensive, as most things are in the government. That staff that I have is purely funded through grants. Every grant has a provision in it by law that allows us to use a certain percentage for the administration. That's the M&A cost. However, that money that's allocated is only for working on that particular grant. For example, I have a large Homeland Security grant that the city receives. Those grant specialists and administrators can only work on that Homeland Security grant. None of the personnel in my office who administer these grants are general funded. They are all paid for. Their salaries, benefits, et cetera, are paid for by grants. So in order for us to administer this money, which would involve the contracts, position authorities, transmittals, expenditures, transfer funds, all of the administrative aspects, it's necessary to have a portion of this money to be used to pay their salaries to do this work, because there is no appropriation for any salaries in other funds to administer this. And it's only for the grant staff who actually work on this on a day-to-day basis, and they apportion a percentage of their work to this and draw it down. I, on the other hand, do it for free. None of the money goes to me. So,
So your salary isn't accounted for in those line items?
No, not at all. I just do it on nights and weekends.
Yeah, I do some of that too. A lot of us do. Now, the $9.1 million of the mayor's salaries were included in the 08-09 city budget, but this is separate and apart from that.
Yes, I don't know that that total number, what it includes, but it would not include any grant reimbursable salaries, which is what most of my staff is, grant reimbursable. And as I said, I don't know what that allocation in the budget, but typically that's general funded salaries, like myself and my policy people, but the grant funded people are not typically included in that.
And it accounts for 5.2. The 110,000 accounts for 5.2% of the total available funding.
That's correct.
Okay, yes. And that's well within the window of amount to be used for these kinds of administrative costs, right?
Yes. Management administration funds for grants can range anywhere from 3 to 7%, depending on the grant.
Right in the middle.
Right. So, and one thing that's important to remember is this is actually leveraged. There are multiple people who will be working on this, who are most of their salaries being paid by other grants, and so only a small percentage is being used to assist with this grant. So if we didn't have all these other grants and all these other personnel, we'd basically be able to fund maybe two people to do 10 different types of things. But because we have a larger office, we leverage the use of all their talents and experience to help assist in this program.
So it's an accumulative amount.
Yes.
Service.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have a question for the CAO.
Yes, sir.
When it comes to the county and the CLEAR program, why is the CAO report not require the council authority for mayor to execute these contracts through the form of a memorandum of understanding?
The majority of the previous CLEAR contracts that have been executed for this purpose have been funded by the grants that we've discussed before, and the grants ordinance is specific in that it requires council approval of grant-funded contracts. However, the county personnel for these particular sites, these 5 new sites, these are general fund dollars, and as such, the ad code does not stipulate council approval of it. However, we have included within the report an estimated sum of how much of this particular allocation would be provided to the county for these purposes, but there is no specific recommendation that requires council approval of the particular contract because it's not stipulated within the administrative code.
That's correct, Councilman. The city's administrative code section 10.5A allows contracting with other government entities without needing the authorization or the authority to do so. However, as you know, we're completely transparent about that issue, and we are contracting with the county just as we do with the grant-related money for the county's district attorney and probation offices.
What's the status of the MOU with the county?
We are contracting, ongoing contracting for the existing sites, and we're in the process of contracting with them for the additional sites. It's pretty much a standard contract. There's no real negotiation.
Continuum of language, just time element is the extension.
The time element and the start dates will determine the total amount that will be necessary. And since we have to stagger the opening of these clear sites because we can't just put all the resources at once, that may affect what the amount would be and the length of the contract. So those are being worked out right now as we work with the LAPD on deployment issues and other staffing needs.
Now, you're correct in citing of the charter and authorities and abilities of departments and or the mayor's office to enter into MOUs, et cetera, and not certain elements, if they're under certain threshold, are not required to be approved by the council. But let me clarify, at least by my understanding, but that does not preclude the council from calling an item forward to have discussion of that item before the council, correct?
No, not that I'm aware of, and we're certainly happy to discuss anything because transparency, of course, is a primary
and I'm glad you pointed out the transparency aspect because that's the only thing that I want to make sure that people don't forget, and that is that obviously certain elements of day-to-day operations it's clear what authorities and abilities and responsibilities departments have and or the mayor's office, et cetera, when it comes to implementing program and not having to have council approval. And that's fine. That's black and white. But at the same time, it's my understanding that if the council deems it necessary to have the dialogue such as in a committee setting like this on a matter, that element of transparency is afforded not only the council but the people of Los Angeles. So just wanted to clarify that.
And I just want to add, if I may, in addition to this, we are also audited by the Comptroller's Office and how the expenditures are made, making sure that they're consistent with both the contracts and the council's intent as well as the mayor. So there's quite a bit of oversight on any money that's being spent on these programs.
I'm sorry, I have to have you clarify what kind of audit that is. It is a financial audit?
A fiscal audit. A fiscal audit is being conducted.
Fiscal audit,
yes.
not a performance
Not a performance audit.
Okay.
I won't get into the other issues on that. But yes, we are required to do single audits and various fiscal audits that are conducted either by the controllers, auditors, or by outside accounting firms.
And regardless of which mayor, regardless of whether it's you or somebody else before you or the next guy or gal or what have you, the financial audits have always been something that is not disputed or nobody's bothered by it or what have you. That's the kind of thing that is always welcomed, correct, and expected, actually.
It may even be mandated either by city or state law.
And also, especially when it comes to grants.
Yeah, with grants.
The grants are required that we have those mechanisms and that we have that proof available to them should they ask for it on an annual basis or should they call us up on it and say, hey, we want to see your audit on these programs we've been funding for you, correct?
That's correct, especially with the federal grants from the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security. I believe as a condition of accepting the grant, you must have regular auditing and compliance procedures, and I believe we often take the single audit, which is done, I think, every year on each of the special fund accounts, and we provide that to the federal government, so that's required. There's no issue on those types of audits.
Yeah, and for the record, the chairman of this committee takes it for granted that the Controller's Office is in fact engaging in that responsibility ongoing when it comes to financial audits of whether it be grants or anything that goes on in the city, regardless of an elected official office being engaged or not. Thank you. Sorry, I had to just
No problem at
clarify
all.
that in case any press is listening. You might think they caught on to something that's not there. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Anybody here to speak on item number 2 or on item number 2? Public comment is open to this committee on item number 2. I do not have any public comment cards here. No one coming forward. Therefore, public comment on item number 2 is now closed. With that, we'll approve the CAO recommendations, and thank you for the clarification on the to my questions on behalf of the CAO. And this item will be referred to Public Safety and Personnel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And once again, public comments closed. Item number 2, we now open public comment, general public comment to this committee. Is anybody here for general public comment to this committee at this time? Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. Thank you.
Mr. Cardenas, adjourn the meeting.
Oh, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.